All right. Hey guys, welcome to our Parent Like a Professional panel. Today we're going to be talking about early language, and we're really excited to share it with you.
Amazing. So, uh, what I'd like to hear from initially is how some of you that have children, how did you guys start teaching your child or children how to communicate in the most simplest way? So, I know a lot of the times we talk about functional communication and we say that tantrums or aggression or non-compliance is a way that individuals communicate. And I would argue that those are examples of functional communication, but they're inappropriate. So what are we doing as parents to promote functional communication in a way that is appropriate and that promotes a vocal mode of communication? So, jump in, guys. Tell me what you guys have done over the course of your time with your little ones.
Well, I remember when my kids were a lot younger, that I did.
How old are your children? Yanokita, how old are your children?
They're currently 9, 7, and 5.
Okay.
But I remember doing a lot of pairing, which, I mean, my family, we talk a lot anyway, but just really kind of slowing down and kind of saying the words as we were like holding them or showing them. And that's even before they're really communicating all that much, when they were really small. But even now, my youngest is going to a Spanish immersion school. So we're learning language all over again there. And so, I mean, although I've taken lots of years of Spanish, I'm learning that as well. So I think that I'm also just doing that again and just seeing myself, like every time I'm going upstairs, I'm like saying it, or opening the door, the bathroom, like El Baño, just kind of just labeling all of the things that I'm doing. And then she repeats it. And so do my other two right now. So that's kind of one of the biggest ways.
So you mentioned pairing, right? And
Yes.
so what you're doing is you're pairing the word or the label to the object in front of the child, and you're repeating that over and over. So, give us an example of how you did that, maybe with food or something that was highly desired with your 1-year-old or your 9-month-old or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I remember with like food, just when we were sitting in the high chair and just, giving them the food right from the beginning, just like pairing the words. So like saying applesauce, or apple, and just kind of saying the word as we were giving it. And then also when we're playing, with the little toys, and I was like the dinosaurs and the little stuff, just repeating what they were or saying car. So just kind of talking and using the language we want them to say eventually.
So that was the pairing procedure.
Yes.
Amazing. Keon, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to talk about the pairing too, because we're speaking behavior analytically with some of these terms, but a lot of our parents are already just doing pairing anyway, that just have typical, children, and they're just using pairing procedures and don't even realize that they're using a pairing procedure. There's not a parent that's like giving their child a piece of grape and not saying, here's your grape, here's your purple grape. Those are like natural pairing situations, and we're still using those words. But also you brought up the form of anti-learning behaviors like whining and crying. That can be a form of functional communication, because the children get access to what they want when they do that. So I don't think so much that we need to teach pairing to our parents, more so that we need to teach them how not to respond and give items to what they want when the kids are crying for those items, and then just stay a pair of the word and give it to them anyway. Because this thing does just happen naturally. It's like we're not doing this big science thing. People just don't recognize that they're already doing the science, so to speak.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. I think what you're saying, Keon, is great advice, and the suggestions you're giving are on target. I think it's a combination of teaching individuals when and when not to provide reinforcement. So, we want to give our children attention, but it's all about timing, and it's all about presentation, and that's like life in general. So when they're screaming and crying because they want something, it's probably best not to provide any attention at that time. And when they're trying to, vocalize, or you hear them making sounds, that's probably the perfect time to give them a lot of attention.
Yeah,
Stephanie, tell us a little bit what your son right now. He's 11. Is that correct?
He's almost 11.
Yeah.
He'll be 11 in November.
So what were some of the challenges teaching language? What did you do to promote functional communication when you were a lot younger?
So a lot of what Monica was saying, you just kind of
saying the names of the items as you're presenting it to him, whether it's during play or when he's eating, or just, you know, as you're going around with like everyday life. So like when you're changing a diaper, you know, you're talking about changing the diaper and like what you're doing and what you're going to do next, not expecting anything, right? You're just kind of commenting on what's happening in life. As Harrison got older, he wasn't talking at all. Like he would make some sounds, but not really talking. You know, he was mostly spending the days with my in-laws that spoke Arabic to him. So he was he was listening to a completely different language during the day when we weren't home. And then we would get home and the Arabic had stopped and we were speaking English. So there was, I think there's a lot of processing happening, but he probably was just super confused about what do I say? And I don't know. So he just wasn't, you know, and, you know, I wasn't worried, but then as time went on, I was like, oh man, this kid's he's not telling me what he wants and he should be. So then we introduced sign language to him. Just very simple things that he really wanted. And I remember my dad was so angry at me. He's like, oh, he's never going to learn to talk if you're teaching him sign language. I said, Dad, he's not talking now anyway. So it doesn't really matter at this point. And so just very simple things. And then as he got older, you know, obviously the language, you know, he's a talker now. So you know, it was just at that age, it was very difficult for me to get him to tell me what he wanted, and he would whine and he would cry. And, you know, working all day and trying to figure out things. And so, you know, he was successful with learning those things, but, you know, it was tough in the beginning trying to figure out what am I going to do. And so that's, you know, then he picked that up and then we started talking and that's it.
And then
I think some of the, go ahead. Sorry, Monica.
When you were teaching him sign language, were you then pairing the sounds as well or the words as you were doing it?
Yeah. So the way that I taught him was like, I would just model it first. So, you know, whatever the word was, and then I would pair the name of the actual word. I wouldn't even make like smaller sounds. So like his favorite food, I remember when he was grapes, he loved grapes. So I found a sign for grapes, taught him grapes, and would pair it with like, oh, grapes, you like grapes, yummy, yummy grapes. And then, you know, and then after a while, then he would start making just some sounds. It wouldn't be like the sound, but anytime that and it wasn't everything that we were teaching him signs for. It was just all the things, not even all the things, but like the maybe 5 things that he really, really liked. And then also like things that he needed, you know, getting out of his high chair or being all done or wanting to be picked up or, you know, and then but yeah, still a lot of talking at the same time as we were giving him the signs.
Yeah, and so therefore, for those people who are a little apprehensive to teach sign language at an early age because they feel that the child might not use vocal language, I mean, if you pair the sounds with sign language, the vocal language will develop. And then plus it's about response effort. When the child realizes I can just use my vocal words rather than raising my hand and making a sign and making sure they can see my hand, the response effort for that is way harder than just using vocal language. So pairing those vocal sounds with the sign language, your child will likely still continue to talk. They won't lose their talking skills because of the sign. It just makes life easier for parents and the child. So, you know.
You know, it's interesting, Stephanie, you were saying, so there was a little bit of a delay in language, and you're saying it was probably a result of Harrison, your son, being exposed to Arabic and English. And so it took him a little longer, and you used sign language to promote functional communication, which is amazing. I'm a product of being raised in a family where my mother was speaking to me in Spanish, and then I was going to school, and you know, they were speaking English, but you know, further back, I should say. I had my mother's accent, so they were saying like he has a speech delay or he has a speech, you know, and so they were sending me to speech, and they're like, no, he has his mother's accent. So certain words were exactly the way my mother would say it, and you know, quick funny story. I was 20 years old or 21 years old when I realized at that time I was dating this girl, and she laughed at me and she said, you said passport. you're looking for your passport. I go, yeah, it's a passport. She goes, no, it's passport. I go, no, it's passport. And,
Funny.
that's how my mom and dad, from being, both of them being from different countries, Germany and Nicaragua, that's how they would say passport. And when we opened it up, it had both passport and passport. But, we're a product of how our parents speak to us. And so
Absolutely.
if there's more than one language, if there's accents, that will be passed down, and will most likely change once you go to, school. If it's an English-speaking school, they'll see the differences. But, at the same time, I never even realized my parents had accents until I was a teenager, until people pointed that out. But, teaching language is such a, interesting. It could be simple, it can be complex. A lot of times when you're working with young children, or at least when you're with your young children, and I'm talking about, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months old, sometimes we fall into saying too much. And sometimes it's better to keep it simple. My son also, we have a video on PLP of both my wife and myself working with my son during mealtime, giving him grapes. And, it's like so hard at times not to say, oh my gosh, look at the purple grape. It's so good. You want the purple grape? It's like keeping it simple. Great. And then, he doesn't say anything. And then I say, great. And he doesn't say anything. And then I say, and he starts to say the G word, the G sound. And then he starts to say the word, and then he starts to imitate. And then I wait, and sometimes he says it on his own. And, we give him little pieces of the grape. So, those are like simple ways to promote language during mealtime. And, Monica, you gave an example about how to promote language during play. But, there's so many opportunities to teach language, and it doesn't have to be a total hardcore structured session. It's just, what's going on in your everyday life, promoting, a vocal mode of communication. And if that vocal mode is not there, using sign language, as Keon and Stephanie have shared, could be a great way to bridge, functional communication in a nonverbal to a verbal mode of communication, or vocal mode of communication.
So I think a good question is the sibling dynamic. Oftentimes you have the oldest sibling that does all the talking, and then the second child, at least this is what happened with my nephews, doesn't talk at all. And either the older sibling is talking for them. If for those of you that have more than one child, I'd love to hear, what are these pairing techniques, or how did you have to change your strategies for when you had a sibling, or if you experienced the older one always talking for the younger?
So Monica, you have 2 girls and a boy, and I have 2 boys and a girl. And I would love to hear from you what it was like with Lucy, your first, then, your second, Kingston, and then to your third, like, what were the differences in language, and how quickly did it emerge with your first versus your second versus your third?
So Lucy, she ruled the roost. So she was very talkative, and Kingston had a harder time. I think he's a little bit quieter. So it did take us a little bit longer, or him a little bit longer, to kind of find his voice. And we had to kind of tell Lucy, yes, like, let him speak sometimes. But I will say, I know that, like, naturally people think that people talk all the time, but I think some people don't do that naturally with their children. And so it almost was like a whole nother model. So like, he was maybe quieter for a longer period of time, and then all of a sudden there was this explosion. And it's like with Lucy, we knew every single word she was going to say because we were saying them. But with Kingston, I mean, he learned so much from her, and she talked a ton, and definitely talked more in his, level. So it was like all of a sudden his language explosion, kind of happened.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I mean, I only have the one child, but I would think that the second child or third child language will develop a lot quicker, or the quicker rate of acquisition, because as Eric mentioned, it's those opportunities to teach language, which is within play, mealtime, and those are times when the child wants something. And an early language learner always wants something. Like, there's not a kid that's younger than 3 years old that doesn't want something. But we as parents don't always have the time to play with them or sit and have a meal with them to interact and give them that vocal language so they can learn quicker. However, those that have an older sibling, their older sibling is always going to have the time and energy to reinforce and talk back with the younger sibling. So it just seems like that the younger sibling would have a quicker rate of acquisition when it comes to speaking early language.
I think in some ways he did, it just kind of came all at one time instead of like a slow progression. It was like, because Lucy would take up, they were only a year and a half apart. So Lucy
Okay.
just took up so much space. And if she would always give him everything before he even asked for it, because she was
Got it.
very nurturing and mother. So here you go, Kingston. Oh, you want this? And she called him Ting Ting. And so it was like,
Well,
"Here,
his
Ting Ting."
name is Kingston, so he's a king, and so she's taken care of him before he even has to ask. You know?
Yes, and she would always speak for him, and so he didn't get those opportunities to use his language. Although I think it was obviously, downloading, and it was going all in, so that when he did start talking, it was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know you knew how to say all that, or knew those words, or so it was a kind of a different. And then Marley, by the third, I mean, she just knew how to yell right from the start. So.
And we
As
had,
a parent, Monica, would you want to tell another parent, like, don't panic if your kid's not speaking right away? Like, give it time. Like, or how did it feel? Like, were you worried at any point, or you felt like it's gonna come?
No, but I definitely think like every parent, like you want to have that one-on-one time with your kiddo, because then it does allow them to share, kind of use that, and then you can kind of check in, because when it's just the, zoo that's happening life, it's hard to see. But sometimes when you take time and slow down and you get that little individual time, if it's ever possible, then it's nice, because I think that's when I got to see like, oh, well, he can, or he does understand, or he does say stuff. It's just that he's never using it. So
yeah. I had a similar experience. So with our first, because we were doing a lot of the pairing procedures that we talked about earlier, and we were promoting a lot of language that would allow our oldest son, Lachlan, to meet his needs, to meet his wants. What we found with the second one, Kai, who was about 20 months younger than my first Lachlan, what we found was that Lachlan was his interpreter, and would basically, but we didn't have, you asked Marquis if Monica had concerns about her second having any type of language delay. Even though we didn't see language like we did with Lachlan, Kai was using language. I just always felt like what you were talking about, Monica, is that the oldest kind of took, this older brother or older sister protective approach, and was, providing, the interpretations to the parents more so. But we saw the same thing with our middle one. It's like all of a sudden he just started using language. It was like an explosion in language. But we did the same type of pairing procedures, and we worked with them during play. And I say work, but we took advantage of opportunities to promote language. And then with our daughter, the third one, it's like she's the third, and she needs to defend herself, and then she needs to use language to get what she wants and needs, because she's competing with her two older brothers. So there I felt like, even though we were using pairing procedures, it wasn't as much. I think her two older brothers were modeling appropriate vocal modes of communication and functional communication. And again, what we talked about earlier is, as we were teaching this language to our children, it's like we were very careful not to reinforce or provide any type of attention to those other maladaptive behaviors that we didn't want to see, like screaming and crying and tantruming, or hitting their siblings because they wanted something, rather than using an appropriate form of communicating their wants and needs. But yeah, it's like with every child, it was a different experience. There's no question about that.
I was going to ask Doris a question. So I know that she, has a plethora of godchildren that she's with, and auntie to a lot of kids. So I was wondering, in terms of like the pairing and talking and things like that, because you have a lot of parents that you see, like, do you see that they naturally do the pairing, or is that something that you've ever kind of like talked to them about in terms of increasing the language?
I would say no. I don't think I've naturally seen it. Maybe with certain things. So maybe like if the baby or like toddler wants to be picked up, like, oh, like you want to be picked up or you want up. I feel like I see it more so in those scenarios, but not in terms of, food or like other objects. It's more of like, oh, you want to get picked up, you want to be held, you want to give mommy a kiss, and those situations. So I wouldn't say that I see it pretty much across the board.
I kind of feel
we're all
like that
talking
was
like
with
it's
my
natural.
in-laws.
That's our field, that we're always kind of doing that. But I didn't know, like, with all the, with your, network of parents, if it's kind of something that you saw naturally, or if.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would do it just because like I have a lot of experience just on the professional side, teaching language that way. And so I know when I would spend time with like my godchildren, I would just naturally do it. And I think just when I naturally interact with younger kids, it's just almost like second nature to me at this point.
Right.
Go ahead, Steph.
I feel like maybe it's like with my parents, like my in-laws, even like they also did not do like the pairing of everything. Like it's like, yeah, when you want to get picked up but it wasn't like, I don't know if it's just because we're in this field and this is what we do, and it just seems natural to us to do and talk and talk and talk. But I feel like with them, it wasn't a lot of like what you're saying, Doris. It was like, oh, you want to be picked up, and then repeating maybe more actions, but not like when you're feeding them like food, or they're commenting on what they're doing. You're right. Like I feel like it, and I look back and I didn't really see that as much as what I would do. It's just I think it seems like it should be like a natural thing that we all do, and maybe it's not for some people. Maybe it's uncomfortable, or I don't know.
So
but you're right.
Here's
Like
a question, Steph. Then, as listening to this as a parent, I could think doing a lot of pairing and using some of these strategies would be very effortful. For you guys, what was that moment that it clicked that it was like worth it to put in that effort? And like, what was reinforcing for you? What was that joy moment when you realized, wow, this is really working?
I would say personally, it was one of my very first clients that I had on my own who was, I would say, was pretty much non-vocal and would maybe make some sounds, and just the emergence of language, just with pairing, just selecting a few items and pairing, and just I saw a huge explosion of language, and I was sold. And this is like well over 10 years ago. I was sold, and so I was like, oh, like this is it. And then from that point forward, I was like, well, this obviously works, and obviously I utilize it with other clients that I actually work with, but then also, like I said, my personal life, it's just second nature. It's been instilled in me at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that when you see that the effort that you're putting in works, and it's like, it's amazing to like watch what it doesn't even, any sound or any word, they're asking for something, or even if you're, like not going on just like language, but trying to like finesse a word and make it sound like the way that it should, or trying to strengthen certain sounds. It's like, wow, this is amazing. And, you try to, I think that's why it becomes so just part of what we do, because we see that it does, and it doesn't even seem like work.
Yeah, it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah. So, I mean, the beautiful thing about everything that you guys are saying is that it's not hard to apply, and it's easy to pick up. So once you start doing this and you start, seeing progress in the little ones, vocal mode of communication, I mean, we're talking about reinforcement, right? You see the results, and you continue doing what you're doing, and then you start seeing more results, and you continue doing what you're doing, and then all of a sudden, your kids are starting to imitate, 2 or 3, word sentences, and then they're using them, and then before you know it, you're having these small little conversations during play. But yeah, it's amazing, especially when you hear the first sound or the first word. And they're using it, to get their needs and wants met. And then even more so when they want to share something with you, and they pick up a toy car and they say car, and they look at you as they pick up the car, which they're, labeling something, but they're possibly also asking you to come and play. So there's so many opportunities when, you're interacting with your little ones. And like we said, these strategies are very simple to apply, and they're simple to remember, especially once you start using them.
So yeah, Doris, you are an aunt and a godmother. You don't have any children of your own. You are in the field too. So a lot of the kids that you work with, you get to give them back at the end of the day. How might that be different with the parent who is with their child all day, every day, and they have to, make sure they're maintaining these teaching skills and being on their toes 24 hours a day?
I think it's obviously for me, I'm just there for a couple hours. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's exhausting for me, but I can imagine that a parent who has maybe other children to attend to or just other things to, you know, to do just in everyday life, that it may not be as feasible for them to be able to apply these processes or implement these strategies the way that I can. So I might be able to, let's say, for example, you know, in 1 hour, I might be able to pair the names of 100 items, for example, whereas a parent who has other things that they're attending to may only get to do 25. So you know, with me, it's like there's probably more learning opportunities just because there's no other distractors going on.
And that's why I asked that question, just to kind of clear it up for the audience, because we as the professionals work in the field. So even those of us who have kids in our parent life, it's just a second language to us to kind of pair everything. So it's a little easier for us. But like Steph said, and I think Monica said, some of their like grandparents or friends that they know don't always pair everything with their child, but doesn't mean that it's not at a high enough rate, which is kind of natural and average. We do a little bit more than the usual. So I don't want the audience out there to feel like that they have to pair every single word and become robots with their children out there, you know. But if you do maybe see some delay in language and you do feel like there's some delay in language, you might want to increase that rate of pairing those words with your child.
That's good, Keon. I agree with that. I
Correct.
think that you're right. Like maybe what everyone's doing is more of a natural rate. And then if you think that there's a concern, then maybe increasing that part may increase the language overall. Or yeah, I think that's really good, Keon. I agree with that.
Thanks so much, guys, for participating today. This is amazing. If you guys have questions, please feel free to comment and we will post them on our Ask the Expert page. And check out our Instagram and check out our Facebook for some small little tidbits about teaching simple language. So like us, follow. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.